Germany's Chancellor Angela Merkel says that she will step down as Chancellor when her term expires in 2021. Now, the news comes after Merkel earlier this Monday said that she would not seek re-election as chair of her Christian Democratic Union at the party's Congress in December. Now, all of this follows heavy losses at elections in the wealthy states of Hesse and Bavaria. Now, Hesse is home to the financial centre of Frankfurt. In yesterday's polls, the centre-right CDU and their centre-left coalition partners, the SPD, lost 10% of their vote share respectively. Now, this is a repeat of what happened 2 weeks ago in the southern state of Bavaria. To help us make sense of Germany's political upheaval, we're joined by Berlin correspondent Emmanuelle Chaze. Welcome back to the programme.
Thank you.
Now, it's serendipitous that you've turned up today. Huge news this Monday. It looks as if Merkel has indeed sounded the bell on her political career. So first and foremost, tell us, is this the end of the Merkel era?
It's definitely the end of an era. However, I would like to point out that she didn't say she would resign from the Chancellery. She's stepping down as head of the CDU. And, after the recurring crisis that we saw at the governmental level in Berlin and the poor score of the CDU at local elections, it was to be expected that some measures would be taken. So this is Angela Merkel's last term, but she's remaining Chancellor for the time being.
Right, she's been Chancellor for 13 years. She's going to continue out the rest of her term. Now, she has long said that leadership of the CDU party and the chancellorship are tied together. You can't perform one role without performing the other. So why isn't she giving up the chancellorship in December?
Well, it seems she had a change of mind, at least on the structure of that mechanism, because she said today that it was completely doable to remain Chancellor and not being head of the CDU party. I think she's waiting to see how it goes with the Great Coalition as well, now that she's announced her retirement, so to speak, after this mandate, as this fourth mandate after Germany's Chancellor.
Because it's long been speculated that a poor showing in regional elections, particularly in Hesse yesterday, could cost Merkel the CDU leadership. So she would have seen this coming. Is there a sense that she's taking control now, opting not to run again rather than risk the humiliation of defeat?
Well, she had said that she had hinted at the fact that she wouldn't run again anyway, but we journalists had expected her to remain as long as possible as the head of the CDU. And indeed, she remained head of the CDU as long as it was possible for her. And indeed, after those poor results in local elections, she's drawing consequences from it. So it seems it's a historic announcement today, but it's not the big news it seems to be right now. I mean, we can see on social networks it's a real storm because she's announcing she's stepping back, but she's just stepping back from the head of her party, not from the Chancellery.
Now, looking forward to the CDU Congress in 6 weeks' time, the position is now open for a new chair to be elected. Last week, Merkel had already put forward potential successors. Now, I guess let's remember she's led this party for 18 years. Who are the likely contenders, number one? And number two, what would they do differently?
Well, we know that Angela Merkel supports the General Secretary of the CDU, Annegret Kramp-Karrenbauer, known in Germany as AKK. She's indeed known as a mini Merkel in a way. She's Merkel's protégée. But there are other contenders as well. There's Friedrich Merz, who already, he's a former head of the opposition under Gerhard Schröder. He already announced his candidacy. And then there's the current Minister of Health, Jens Spahn, who's known for having had several issues with the Chancellor within the CDU. He criticized her migration policy, for example. In any case, any of the candidates who might be elected gear the party towards the right rather than towards the center.
Right. Now, just to put this in context, back in March, when the Grand Coalition was formed, the SPD, Social Democrats, they were actually quite reluctant to enter into another coalition with the Conservatives. And many in this party say that the failings of the federal government are to blame for their failings at regional elections. So tell us, what changes for the SPD now that Merkel's not seeking to remain leader of her party? And more to the point, does this make the coalition with the CDU any more comfortable?
Well, it has never been a comfortable coalition. It was born in sufferings, and it has been a never-ending succession of crises. And the SPD has threatened many times to step out of this coalition, but the SPD also has to look at its own failings within that coalition. And Andrea Nahles, after the poor result of the SPD in Hesse yesterday, also said that and called for new measures being taken within the SPD to explain that lack of confidence shown by the voters, by those big traditional political parties like the CDU and the SPD fare very poorly and equally poorly in the local elections as a punishment for the work or lack thereof work of the coalition in Berlin.
Following Andrea Nahles' comments, and also pointing out that some rank-and-file members of the SPD are really hoping to regroup as an opposition, calling for ending their participation to the coalition. What are the chances now that the SPD would choose to pull out of the coalition, effectively bringing down Merkel's government?
Well, I don't know. I mean, like I said, it's been a difficult coalition from day one, and we can see that the SPD is basically clinging to power as long as they can, as it seems, because there's no alternative. They don't seduce the usual voters anymore, so they're trying to make the best out of a very difficult situation. What we see, on the other hand, is that more and more people are giving their votes to alternative parties, to parties with a strong theme, strong emphasis on one theme. For example, the Greens are geared towards the environment and human rights. The AfD, the Alternative for Germany, is an anti-migrant and xenophobic party. So we can see an antagonization of the German society that profits for those parties, to those parties.
So let's look a little more closely at that. The heavy losses in Hesse in Bavaria. As you say, this is happening because the traditional parties are failing to renew themselves, so the fringe parties are now benefiting. The Greens have done particularly well. As you say, they're not anti-immigration. Tell us a little bit more about what is behind their success.
Well, we the media often emphasize the success of the Alternative for Germany, for example, saying, oh, they fare very well. Yes, there is a resurgence of the far right in Germany, but it's still a minority. And we saw that in the big protests, Wir sind mehr and Unteilbar in Berlin. There were more than 200,000 people in the streets saying no to far right ideology. And that is what is translated in the votes today when people turn towards other parties who define politics in another way and do not focus on migration. Migration is only one contentious point, and in Germany, and other issues such as environment and, for example, the diesel scandal are also of concern, and pensions, are also of concern for millions of voters in Germany.
The local issues. Nevertheless, we do need to talk about the populists. You say the resurgence of the far right is a minority. Nevertheless, they are entering the regional assembly in Hesse for the first time, as they did with Bavaria, if I'm not mistaken. I'm just wondering how their presence in parliament will shift the political landscape.
Well, again, it's an antagonization within the regional parliaments as well. They do enter the last of the 16th German local parliament that didn't have the far right presence. So now we can see it's overall present in regional and the national parliament. Two, so indeed they are here, but like I said, this will just antagonize the politics, and it will push other parties to deliver more and to regain the trust of its voters.
Okay, well, I guess we'll keep watching German politics. There's a lot to be said. Thank you so much for coming in to speak to us today. That was Emmanuelle Chaze, our correspondent in Berlin. Well, that brings us to the end of Paris Live PM for this Monday. Thanks for being with us. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow. Bye-bye.